How does that help us? It helps us because it helps us have one-on-one conversations with people. It allows us to get organic exposure. It allows us to practice our messaging. It allows us to have content to share across social media. It's a person that you now know, so you never know what can happen from there. So it's just a lot of opportunities from 1 hour of your time. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all of the time. Today, for episode number 112, the 5 things I look at when someone isn't growing as much as they want. So again, I have the stat, I track the number now, which is awesome. As of today, I think I've done 390 podcast breakthrough sessions. So I've done a lot of podcast breakthrough sessions. And the most common 3 things are I want to grow, I want to monetize, or I just don't know what I don't know. Those are really kind of the 3. Show growth, making money, and honestly, what do you suggest based on what you know and I don't yet? Those are kind of the main 3. But there's things I look at when somebody comes to me and says, well, my show isn't growing as much as I want. And there's a lot. I look at their complete online presence. I look at their website if they have one. There's a lot of stuff I do. But there are kind of 5 things that I think apply to everybody. And my goal is to add as much value to all podcasters as possible. So I didn't want to go too specific. But these are the 5 things that I look for when somebody comes to me and says, I'm just not growing as much as I want. What do you think I should do? I literally did this yesterday. And that's why I wanted to do the episode. All right. So the first thing I look at when somebody comes to me and says, my show isn't growing, is what is the name of their podcast? A lot of people like to name their podcast after themselves. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's not going to help searchability necessarily, most likely. It's not going to create an intuitive understanding of whether or not somebody should self-identify and go listen to the show. It doesn't necessarily talk about the problems you're going to solve. It doesn't necessarily suggest what genre it should be in. It doesn't really help to name your show your name unless you're already famous. And my guess is, if you're already famous, you have enough money to just have somebody take care of all that. So you're not even really worried about growth, because if you're famous and you start a podcast, you're probably going to be okay. I really think that's where a lot of people get stuck, is they have a name in mind, they start the podcast, and then maybe they're 2 months in, 4 months in, 6 months in, a year in, and things aren't working. And they assume that it's a bunch of other things, when one simple thing is it's probably your name. Your name has something to do with it. Is it the main thing? No, I think everything is kind of supplemental. But that's one thing I've learned from going on as many podcasts as I have, is some of the names are just not helping. They are not creating an opportunity. They are holding the person back. They just don't know it. And it's very rare that I'll ever say that to someone unless they ask. Right? It's not my job to come on as a guest, try to add value, and then potentially offend you by giving you feedback. If somebody wants to ask, I'll give them that. But one of the things that I say first when I talk to someone is, hey, you're going to hate me for this, potentially, and take everything I said and run it through your own filter. You don't have to do anything I said today on today's call, but your name is a problem. So that's one thing. Does your name suggest what your show is about? Does it suggest the problems that you're going to solve? Podcast Growth University. It's about podcasting. It's about podcast growth, and it's a teaching platform, right? You're going to learn here. Even like Next Level University, it's not the best name in the world. We knew that going in. For us, it was, we're going to do an episode every day. This is going to be bigger than just a podcast. I want to make sure that the name is something I want to say every day. It's something that I can connect to the business later on. But Next Level University, you kind of have an idea. Next Level suggests improvement. University suggests education. Yeah, it's kind of there. But if we were to do something like, finding fulfillment or whatever, right? There's a lot of other ways we could go. But we made the decision that I'm not necessarily doing that for search engine optimization. I'm not necessarily doing that for searchability. I want to make sure that I'm happy saying it 7 times a week, because if you're not happy saying the name, you're going to get sick of it very quickly. So that's another piece when it comes to naming. So that's one thing is, does your name suggest what your podcast is about? And is it helping or hurting? Second thing is artwork. Obviously, yes, the name is a piece of that, but this is one of the most common things I see is people either just go on Canva, and again, in the beginning, do this. Go on Canva, make a very simple piece of artwork for their show, and then set it up. Eventually, though, you probably want to rebrand that and make it nicer. Because as you grow and you evolve and you get clearer on your audience and you get clearer on your color schemes and maybe you change your name and you have headshots taken, that's another thing that I see very often is everybody going to listen to your podcast because of your artwork? No. But imagine if somebody is just searching, let's say you have a podcast about mindset, and they're searching mindset, and your podcast artwork is up against a bunch of other shows. Is yours going to stand out or no? Because if it's not going to stand out, it's not really helping us with organic discovery. Fiverr.com, Upwork.com, Canva, if you want to get creative. You can reach out to us if you need help. We have a graphic design team. But the artwork is something that I've seen hold people back because it's almost like a set it and forget it. You do it once, and then you just never improve it. Make sure the artwork is a really, really good representation of what people are going to get when they come into your show. That is literally the first impression that they're going to have. They're going to see your artwork, and they're going to see the title. And if those are X and X, they're not even going to go to the next step. But if they like the title and they like the artwork, they might give you a shot. So that's something I always look at. So back in the day, when I started in 2017, my podcast was called the Hyper Conscious Podcast. And it was a cartoon version of me. And I love the artwork. I do. I will always have a soft spot for that artwork. I got it created on Fiverr, I think, or Upwork. Cost me, $20. But I always loved it. I loved it for me, but I also understand that it did not suggest at all what the podcast was about. It wasn't super high quality. It was a cartoon, so maybe that's suggesting it's less serious than it was. I liked it because I think it fit me as a human. I was very curious. I wasn't super serious. So I don't think it was the worst artwork, but I also don't necessarily think it would have helped me in the long run. So that's number 2. Number 3. Hold on. Oh, okay. Number 3 is episode titles. So now we know, okay, this is the name of the show. This is what the artwork looks like. Awesome. Episode titles. One of the most common things I see is people will just put episode, it'll just say number 15 growth or number 17 mindset with Kevin Palmieri, whatever it is. We really have to understand that it's our job to get people to listen to these episodes. Not just people who have never heard of us, but people who have heard of us. Just because somebody subscribes to your show does not mean they're going to listen to every episode. You still have to get them to listen. So imagine if I just did episode number 112, growth. Everything's kind of about growth. It's not going to work. But I want you to know exactly what this episode is about. This is the 5 things I look at when someone isn't growing as much as they want. And could I make that title better? I'm sure. Right? There's probably a bunch of ways I can make it better. For me, that feels the best. I don't want it to be clickbaity. I don't want it to be the 5 things I look at when someone wants to get to 1 million listens. That's just not the way I want to do it. You do you, but just make sure it's not clickbait because you're going to end up having people that are disappointed. But that's something I've seen very, very common. Right, very, very often. The other thing I see is if they have the flow of their titles where it's the guest name, so it's the episode number, guest name, and then the actual title, what the episode is about. If nobody knows who the guest is, I wouldn't suggest putting their name before the actual title. Because your buzzwords, your keywords, the problems that you're solving are going to be more valuable than the guest name. Now, if you have somebody massive to your audience, put their name first. But if you're having people from Podmatch and Matchmaker that people don't necessarily know yet, nothing wrong with that. Nobody knows me. I wouldn't suggest putting my name first. If you have me as a guest, put something else. From rock bottom to thriving, or from overcoming suicide to whatever it is, right? From 0 to 1 million listens, whatever. Then you can have the name. But we have to think, we want to catch the audience's curiosity and their attention very quickly, someone's name probably isn't going to do that unless their name has a lot of name recognition. So that's always kind of my thought. There's a lot of conversation between should you have the episode number or not. I always have liked to. Is that what's best for growth? I haven't really seen anything that suggests it's not. But to me, it's one of those things where not everything I do is just for growth. I like it because I can go listen to episode number 50. And you can see it's number 50, blank, 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 blank. So I think that's more of a, what's your personal preference than anything? But that's something I look at. Because just because you have, let's say you have 500 subscribers, so 500 followers, right, between Apple and Spotify, wherever. Just because you have those 500 people that are subscribed or following does not mean they're going to listen to every episode. You have to get them to listen, which means the titles have to be there. When someone isn't growing as much as they want, it's usually a mixture of two things. They're not getting more people that don't know them, like them, and trust them, and they're not maintaining the same level of audience that know them, like them, and trust them. It's a conversation of retention and growth when we're trying to grow. When we're trying to grow, it's not just growth. It's also retention of the audience that we currently have. Because if you're losing people and gaining people, you're gaining less people, so you're not growing as much. So that's kind of the thought I have with the episode titles. This one is probably completely random that other people might not assume. I want to look at somebody's DMs, and I want to look at their story views and how many stories they're putting up. Again, yes, this is mostly Instagram. TikTok's different. LinkedIn's different. So this is kind of Instagram, but we can connect it to other platforms. Every day I have some sort of story up. Usually I aim for like 5 to 7. If I can have 5 to 7 story posts up a day, I'm happy with that. The reason is I look at who is watching it, I look at who is commenting, and that's an opportunity to have conversation. So I've been doing a lot of fitness content lately. Fitness content has created conversation with people that I haven't talked to before. Now I can engage with those humans and then just kind of see what happens.
Hi, my name's John Laredo, and I just wanted to give a big shout out to Kevin Palmieri. I had reached out to him. He had been referred to me when I had shared with a friend of mine some interest in doing a podcast, and he said, "You've got to use Kevin. He's fantastic. He's the best around. He'll get you started and off the ground and soaring high in no time." And take it from somebody who knows nothing about podcasting other than maybe saying a few things, but as far as behind the scenes, the startup, everything, I knew nothing. Kevin was phenomenal in terms of leading me through the whole process, and not just easy to work with, but really, really knows his stuff. A great combination between leading me through all the stuff I had no idea what I was doing, but also really listening to me and understanding what it was I was trying to accomplish and what my vision is. So whether you're looking for somebody to help you and get you started, or somebody, as I've done, where I'm putting it entirely in his hands because I've got total trust and confidence in him, and he is a true pro and easy to work with, any of those ends of the spectrum, you're going to have a lot of success and a lot of fun working with Kevin. Trust me. Thanks.
If your show isn't growing, you're most likely not leveraging social media as much as you could be. I'm not saying just from a posting standpoint. I'm saying from a conversation standpoint. Remember, I don't expect conversion necessarily from social media. We're not a brick and mortar business who is running targeted ads to a specific location hoping to get people to walk through the door. That's not what we're doing on social media. Social media is an opportunity to connect with people who might end up listening to the show eventually, or you just don't know what happens when you connect with someone for a long enough period of time. So just a thought, I'm looking at their DMs, what kind of conversations are you having one-on-one, and their story views. The DMs are not just DMs on social media. I would say the number of one-on-one conversations you're having in general. So as an example, they're not clients, they're, acquaintances at this point, becoming friends, and I'm going to end up going on their show at some point. But one of the things that they are really good at, it's a husband and wife couple. They are really good at networking, and they're really good at just having conversations with a bunch of people, talking about the podcast, and then some of the people want to come on, Other people want to invest money into the show because they believe in the mission so much. The number of one-on-one conversations they are having is dictating the level of quote-unquote success that they're looking for. And they're doing really, really well at that. It's not just the number of listens. It's not just how many people are liking their stuff on social media. It's how do we leverage the momentum we have to have conversations. So that's something I'm always looking at. Number of one-on-one conversations, DMs to see what kind of conversations you have going on there. And then story views are usually good because you might put up a post and you might get 5 people that liked it. You don't know all the people that looked at it. On your story, you know all the people that looked at it. So at least you have an idea, and it's good data to measure. All right, number 5, you've heard me talk about this before, but this is always something I'm looking at, consumption rate. Your show will not grow if your consumption rate is not good, because that is suggesting either your audio quality is off, your guest audio quality is off, your messaging is off, your intro is too long, whatever. Your bio read for your guest is too long. If your consumption rate is low, that means even if your show did have the opportunity to grow, most people would just fall out because your content is not sticky enough. Your content just isn't high enough quality yet, and that's totally fine. That's actually a simple thing to fix because you just have to change some things around. Get a new mic. It doesn't have to be a crazy mic, but if your audio quality isn't good, get a new mic. If your guest's audio quality isn't good, send a pre-flight checklist. Maybe we'll do an episode on that at some point. If you're taking time to get into the content, you can work on that through scripting. But if your consumption rate is not good, it really doesn't matter how much exposure you get to a new audience. Imagine a restaurant who doesn't have good food. If they don't have good food, it doesn't matter if they go viral. If they go viral, they're just going to get a lot of 1- and 2-star reviews, and that's actually going to hurt them more than anything. I'm not saying that'll happen to you. I'm not saying you'll get a bunch of 1- and 2-star reviews. But if the consumption rate isn't there, it's going to be very, very challenging to grow. And that's something very easy to look at. Really, what am I saying in this episode? I'm looking at a lot of the data. What is your name compared to other names in your industry? How are you titling your episodes? How many story views have you gotten and how many conversations did you start? What does your artwork look like compared to other shows in your industry? So that's all the consumption rate thing really is, okay, let's look at the data. Which episodes of yours do the best? How do we make sure we're doing more of those? Oh, every time you do a solo episode, it gets 100% or 110% consumption. That's a suggestion that people want to hear more from you. So that's something to optimize for sure. And then number 6, I always try to give a bonus because I could probably do a bigger list, but I want to keep it somewhat concise. How many other shows are you going on? Now more than ever. This is becoming very, 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 very important. In the beginning, it was enough to have a podcast and have good guests on and have relatively good social media content. That's not enough anymore. It's just going to require way more to grow, and you're going to have to get very creative. So think of it this way. Going on other shows, okay. How does that help us? It helps us because it helps us have one-on-one conversations with people. It allows us to get organic exposure. It allows us to practice our messaging. It allows us to have content to share across social media. It's a person that you now know, so you never know what can happen from there. So it's just a lot of opportunities from 1 hour of your time. This is my belief now, and this is kind of the way I look at it. Let's take 1 hour of your time is always going to be the most valuably spent recording a podcast episode for your show in the podcast space, right? If you're doing this as a hobby, spending time with your family might be higher importance, going to the gym, mental health, right? I'm not saying that's the most important thing. But in the silo of podcasting, the most valuable use of your time is going to be producing high-quality content on your platform. I think the second highest important thing would probably be going on other podcasts. Yeah, if you have a Facebook group, make sure every day you're posting in there. But you going on other podcasts is going to be a great use of your time, even if you don't get the results you expect. Are you going to get 100 listeners every time you go on a show? No, absolutely not. But you're going to get some lesson that you didn't have before. And I'm willing to bet for most of us, going on one podcast that even has an audience of 50 people that listen to each episode is just as valuable as a social media post. Because if you have 100 followers or 500 followers, they're seeing content again, which is good. But you being on a podcast as a guest with a podcast audience who already listens to podcasts, it makes the call to action a little bit easier. If it's a good quality host, they'll get to the end and say, hey, Kev, where can people find out more about you? And then you can always promote your podcast there. And it's just good to be in the flow of things. It's good to see how other people interview. It's good to see what other people's setups are. It's good to see what other platforms people use. Are they using Riverside, StreamYard, Zoom, something completely different, Google Meet? How are people recording? What are their setups like? Do they have really nice cameras? I think as the technology has become more sustainable in terms of lower barrier to entry, I think people have a lot nicer equipment now. I mean, in the beginning, it was the Wild West. And most of the guests we interviewed didn't even have mics. They didn't have cameras. Now, you can get a really good microphone for $60, $70, $80. So I think the equipment has come way up. So maybe you being on somebody else's podcast will show you that, oh, wow, that person has a really nice setup. You never know. You never know what might happen. The other thing is, who knows? You might be a guest on a podcast. That person might be doing like an online summit at some point, and they might need somebody who talks about what you talk about. And there you go. That's a really good opportunity to do something. Potential clients as hosts as well. So there's a lot of things that can come from that. So just to recap, episode titles, DMs and story views, the name of the actual show, the artwork for your show, total consumption rate, and then the bonus is how many other shows have you been going on. That will always be a valuable use of your time, and it's getting easier and easier because there's so many podcast platforms. Just do your best not to be entitled and say, well, this show isn't big enough. I don't expect you to be able to be a guest on a show that's bigger than yours. Unless you're already an expert in something and you already have credibility and expertise. But if the podcast is the most quote-unquote successful thing you have going on, I don't expect to be on shows bigger than mine. It just doesn't necessarily work that way. So just try your best not to be entitled when it comes to that. And then don't connect your self-worth to the size of the shows you're going on. I've been on a lot of shows where they weren't even live yet. I've been a lot of episode 1s. I'm all for it. I don't really care about the size of the audience. I want to get really good at this. And maybe we'll do an episode on this too. We'll talk about branding. Let me make a note of that. Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll do an episode at some point on long-term versus short-term branding and sales. We'll do a deep dive in that. All right. Is there anything I didn't touch on that I want to touch on quickly here? I don't think so. If you feel like you're stuck, I would look at these places. I would go to these 6 things, and I would try to work on a 1% improvement for each of them. Definitely be looking at your consumption rate. That's something we should be doing monthly, at least monthly, if not weekly. I mean, if you're only dropping 1 episode a week, and again, I don't mean only talking down to anyone. I just mean if that's the amount of episodes you're dropping, then monthly is probably good because it's going to take time for the stats to actually get there. But that's definitely something worth doing at least monthly. Artwork, that's probably like a yearly thing. But it depends because when you start your podcast, you don't know as much as you do when you're a year in. So maybe a year in, you say, wow, this artwork was enough to get me here, and now it's time to rebrand or upgrade. Doesn't necessarily have to be a rebrand. So these are the 6 places I would look if you feel like you're stuck and you're not growing as much as you want. If you feel like you've looked here and you can't figure it out and maybe there's something else missing, I will have my link in the show notes for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session where it will be my goal to add as much value to you as possible. And I will quite literally let you guide the conversation. Where do you feel like the most valuable use of our time together would be spent? So that'll be the question I would ask you. Somebody is hammering something outside. I think the dumpster is getting emptied. And also, I am going to start Podcast Growth Nation in the next couple weeks. So I've already started creating some content. That will be a call to action that we'll have. I'll have a link in the show notes. I'll have a couple entrance questions just so I can make sure the content is valuable. But that is something that I'm going to be creating in the next few weeks for sure. Lastly, if you are going to Podcast Movement in Washington, D.C., and you want to meet up or I don't know, whatever, I have an Airbnb. I'll be working out hopefully every day when I'm there. So I'm going to be busy. But if you want to meet up at the venue, you want to get a coffee, whatever, you want to do an in-person interview, I don't know, whatever. Let's get weird and see what happens. So I will be there. Let me know at NeverQuitKid. You can reach out to me there. As always, I appreciate you all very, very much. I hope you don't feel stuck. I hope you feel like you're making progress. I hope you're focusing on 1% improvements. I hope maybe you're going to Podcast Movement if it's in the budget. And if you are, I hope I get the opportunity to potentially meet you when you're there. Until next week, keep on crushing it. Keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you then.